were sentenced to death throughout the medieval era in England, Switzerland, and Denmark, and this later grew into organised persecution. Many countries, including Germany, Poland, and Italy, ordered the expulsion of all Roma. In the 1930s, as many of us know, although some people don't know this, the Nazis saw Roma as racially inferior, transported possibly up to 1.5 million Roma to the detention camps. It's called the Forgotten Holocaust. I took part in a campaign called Dignity for Leti, which was about giving a site back to the Roma where there had been a detention camp just outside Prague. I'm very proud that we managed to do that as a community standing against racism in the European sphere. Subsequent to the war, Roma continued to be discriminated against and oppressed, especially in the Soviet Union. Between the 1970s and the 1990s, the Czech Republic and Slovakia sterilized around 90,000 Romani women against their will. Here in the UK, anti-Gypsyism remains pervasive. It's rarely challenged, even among people who would otherwise regard themselves as liberal and open-minded. The Conservative Party manifesto in 2020 included clear measures aimed at criminalising traveller encampments, and the recent Channel 4 dispatches resulted in hundreds of complaints from the Gypsy Romany community, who experienced increased racism as a result of that documentary. We've also, in recent weeks, seen Toby Perkins, Labour's Shadow Apprenticeships Minister, have to apologise for his anti-traveller comments. So, you know, I'm a Labour member and we have a problem in our party too regarding this. At a European level, there's been some progress with a Roma strategy and a very close working with the Fundamental Rights Agency, who I work closely with, but member states are very slow and in some cases reluctant to implement the recommendations from the European institutions. And scapegoating of Gypsy Romany travellers goes hand in hand with anti-migrant rhetoric. Anyway, today we're going to be joined by a fantastic array of speakers to discuss the situation. What are the latest developments? How does the persecution relate to the rise of the new far right? And perhaps most importantly, what are communities doing to defend themselves, and what can we and what can you do to help? So the speakers this week include Rosa Marie Cisneros, who I met at a Roma Women's Congress in Barcelona 2 years ago when I was a speaker there. Rosa Maria is a dance historian, choreographer, dancer, critic, Romani studies scholar, sociologist, teacher, flamenco historian, peace activist. Her PhD is in sociology with a focus on Roma women, intersectionality, feminism and communication. She's also managed major EU-funded projects and collaborates closely with the University of Barcelona's Centre for Research on Theories and Practices of Overcoming Inequalities, and works very closely with the Roma Archive and many NGOs. She's currently living in Sheffield and working in Coventry. We've also got Ben Smoke, who is an activist and journalist, was one of the Stansted 15 group of activists who were prosecuted for preventing the takeoff of a Home Office charter flight in 2017. So an absolute hero, Ben. He's now a contributing editor at Huck magazine, and he himself is of Gypsy descent. And he's one of the few journalists with a mainstream platform to have written about the oppression of travellers. Jane Lee, who is literally 5 minutes down the road from me right now, is a Romany Gypsy anthropologist who's recently retrained as a primary school teacher. She's been an equality and BME officer for North West Durham CLP, and she's a mum to 6 lovely children, I know because I've worked with them. And if we can get Ramona Constantin on the line from Romania. Ramona is a former big issue seller, now researcher and support worker at Migrom in Manchester, which is a Manchester University funded project. She won the European Special Women's Award 2018 for outstanding contribution to services to expat EU 27 communities in Manchester. And I met Ramona around about the time of the 2016 UK referendum on the EU, when Gypsy Romany Traveller communities in Manchester and Liverpool in my constituency were experiencing really terrible racism and on the receiving end of a lot of abuse and harassment. So that's the introductions. The format is going to be around 10 minutes of introductory remarks from each of the speakers. I know some of them have got films and PowerPoints to show us. At the end of that 10 minutes, then we open the floor for contributions from all of you listening and questions. And then we'll return to the speakers for some final remarks. And I do know that Ben will have to leave before the end because he's got another campaign action and protest to attend. But first of all, I'm going to call on Jane Lee to speak. Jane, the floor is yours. Unmute yourself.
Unmute. I did it. Thank you. Thanks, Julie. I'd just like to first just mention a comment what you said about the persecution of Gypsies during the Holocaust. There was a clear plan for the Gypsies of the Holocaust, whether they were Roma, Sinti, right across Europe, including in England. And Hitler actually wrote a letter, which we have got as part of a, not the original letter, but we have got a copy of that original letter that went out to the government in England from Hitler, asking where our Gypsies were housed, where the English Gypsies were housed, where we lived, were we on kind of in a specific area, because the plan was to eradicate us all. So just, you know, that goes to the depth of this racism. And I'd really like to just start by saying, you know, I grew up and actually went to school in an era where it was lawful for that head teacher to say, we don't want Gypsy children in our school. We absolutely don't want them, and they could keep them out of the school. 30 years later, my children went to school. That law had been kind of abolished, it had been stopped. However, head teachers were still, and are still, school staff are still quite happy to ask for your children to be taken out of the school, for your children to be taught differently. So I'll give you some examples. When my children were in primary school, the head teacher, who had been there 3 days, asked if I would take my children out of the school, and her words were, "It's not the right school for your type of children." She ended up, after quite a long fight, she ended up taking them off roll, which again is unlawful. But the local authority, because they don't understand racism, they don't understand how it works, they feel it's not their issue, they supported the school. They still do that now. Another example is secondary school, and this is just a couple of years ago. My daughter was expected, because the member of staff didn't like her, to sit outside of the classroom, sit outside in a corridor, while all the other children could sit inside and access the learning. She hadn't done anything wrong, she wasn't doing anything wrong, but because that member of staff didn't want a Gypsy child in their class, that was deemed right by the school. I think since the Conservatives have got in, it has increased tenfold. Just the other day, there was a poster being put up in Poole about if you see a gypsy, if you see travellers in your area, report it, dial 999. It's since been they've been asked to take it down. However, we're still waiting, and I think it was the Traveller Movement who highlighted this. The Traveller Movement asked the council, the local council, to intervene. They did, and they asked for it to be taken down. However, they asked for a statement saying how the council itself will support gypsies, and they will support this stance that it been, not tolerated. We're still waiting for that. And I think one of the issues that we have, and I'm experiencing personally, is that supposed support services, so the police, the local authority, they don't understand racism. They don't understand it systemically. But as individuals who are supposed to uphold the law, they don't understand it, so they fail to act upon it, which leaves us in a very vulnerable situation. And they feel that they shouldn't be doing anything. They feel that because we have white skin, then, how can it be racist? I think we need to start. There are two ways about this, and I think one of the ways is we need to start with the systems, the support systems that are supposed to be in place to support everybody. We need to start with them. We need to show them what their responsibilities are, but we also need to get straight into schools right at the bottom, teach children that this is the whole possibility for people you will come into contact with, and it shouldn't be teaching about, I hate the word tolerance, because tolerance implies that we'll tolerate them being in the same room as us, we'll tolerate them accessing services, we'll tolerate all of that kind of thing. Acceptance, because we're all different. Every ethnic group is different, and we should be accepting that. And that's where I would start from. And another stance, and this is coming from a very personal stance, anthropology. I'm an anthropology graduate. It teaches so much. And I just think there's a reason why in England, and I can't say about across Europe because I don't know, but in England we don't teach anthropology at all until we get to degree level. And that is a flaw in our in our education system, because anthropology and the possibilities for anthropology, what it can teach children, is, it's massive. It's absolutely huge. And if we had anthropology threaded throughout the education system from reception year right the way through, we could change people's views, perceptions, not just with Gypsy Romany Traveller, but across, and it would change the face of racism. I am sure we would see not necessarily the left, but actually people understanding and seeing how racism affects people, understanding what racism is, and actually starting to speak up for all peoples.
Have you got a film to show us, Jane?
No, sorry, Julie, I don't.
Right, okay. But maybe there are some resources that you would be able to post in the chat or share with another Europe is possible. We can share that with our members and our wider community. I think that would be really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I think if anybody's interested in the fight back, the Travellers Times has a web page. It also has a Facebook page, and that is linked with the Traveller Movement, and also Friends, Families and Travellers. And I think what's becoming obvious now is that people are starting to stand up and say no. put their names to things. And I think as the social media spreads and everybody's becoming involved, it's a simpler way to put your name to something, to actually fight back. Because I think in years gone by, we've been excluded from education, which is then had a knock-on effect. So it's excluded us from education. We've been very accepting of, we have no means to fight. I think now we have some very good positioned people within the Traveller movement, within the Traveller Times team, and friends, families and travellers. And I think if we tap into that, we can, and show them support, we can in turn build a kind of a supportive community it's a definite firm base to start something from. I know that's my first point of call for me personally, as well as when others, on the back of another meeting, when others have asked, that's who I always point them, because it gives you a band. And I think also it groups Gypsy Romany Traveller together as well, even though we are different groups. What I would say is, with Irish Travellers, they are their own distinct group. Gypsy and Roma, however, we do have shared a shared ancestor type thing. I've worked with Roma people who came over, and our language does cross over. We do speak the same Romany, although inflicted with our own home country language. So I just think we need to stand up. We need to make a stand, and we don't need to reinvent anything. We can start from those groups that I've said. But I think the most important thing is having our voice heard.
Okay, Jane, thanks so much for that. And I can certainly vouch for, you're a really strong, fantastic member of our CLP. I'm really proud that, you know, I mean, I've watched your work over the past few years, and it's been amazing. And like many women, you're juggling multiple priorities as well. So thanks a lot for that.
Thank you.
Okay. If you could mute yourself, Jane. I should have said to everybody that this event is being recorded, and we'll be posting it on our website over the next week. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Ben Smoke, who I'll ask you to speak for about 10 minutes, Ben, to respond to the questions that we're asking today. Okay.
So just wanted to kind of start by saying thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel with like formidable and incredible other panelists. I'm really excited to be able to hear what you have to say, so I'm not going to speak for too long. As it was said in the introduction, I'm a journalist, and I'm of Romani descent. So on my mum's side of the family, my grandparents are Romani. So I never grew up in a community. It's kind of been this sort of distant link, this sort of thing that we've known about that's sort of there. And around the time of the general election last year, I was kind of doing a lot of research into the Tory party manifesto, kind of pulling it apart and looking at the implications, and came across the proposal for new legislation to tackle GRT people in this country, and so sort of did some digging. And I think Julie mentioned at the start, the Holocaust, the systemic slaughter of Gypsy people in Europe is one that's potentially, I mean, it's called the forgotten Holocaust. It's nowhere near as well known, but I think it's sort of coming into people's consciousness, and so I ended up going to the Holocaust Memorial Library in Russell Square here in London. They had an exhibit on looking at what happened in the 30s and 40s across Europe, and it was harrowing and awful, and it felt very real and very sort of, it was, looking at pictures of people that look like me and look like my family, and reading the accounts and reading what happened, and I think Jane was saying about the, you know, how planned it was, how you know, clean and industrial this whole process was, and it kind of really affected me. And I remember like walking out and I was on the phone to my mum, and I was like, I just can't, it sort of like really hit home. And then after over the next few days, I was kind of like, okay, well, you know, that's a thing that happened and it was horrendous and we should absolutely never forget it. But like, what's happening now? What's going on? And so I did, you know, start doing more research. And I think what we forget, I think particularly people that aren't in the community and aren't, you know, don't define as GRT, you know, don't necessarily, I think, understand the full extent of it, of the racism faced by GRT people. So there was a young lad in Merseyside in 2003. His name was Johnny Delaney. He was with his friends, as a young Irish traveller lad. He was with his pals in the shop. He got into some argy-bargy with these local kids. They left. They tried to get away. They were running across the field. As they were running, these local kids came and found them and beat Johnny to death on the field. And the thing that really stuck with me with that story is how brutal and horrendous it was. But as they were running away, a member of the public came over, tried to stop them, and they scarpered. As they were running away, they were reported to have said, "He's only a fucking gypsy." And I think that to me really like brings it home, is this idea of the lesser, you know, what does it matter? They're only gypsies. They're not real people. They're not real, you know, what their concerns shouldn't matter to us. We don't care. And I think that we've seen that over and over again, that kind of pervasiveness, the pervasiveness of that dehumanization that, you know, has this huge, you know, we can see it very clearly within the Holocaust, but the way that it's continued throughout Europe in the decades that have come after that. And I think it was mentioned about the cleansing of Romany women in Czechoslovakia from the 70s to the 90s, and I think actually it went on into the early 2000s. One of the things that I always find incredibly harrowing is about the previous Labour government, who did some incredible things and brought in some incredible policies, particularly for like young working class people like me, who would have had a completely different life if we didn't have working tax credits and a minimum wage, etc. However, as well as the Iraq War, you know, the extension and the implementation of the beginnings of the hostile environment, the implementation of charter flights, the first of which went to Albania, I believe, and the second targeted specifically Romani women and took them back to Czechoslovakia, a place that was sterilizing them. I think we kind of forget, and we don't sort of expect, we don't kind of link up, and we don't connect the dots a lot with what's going on. And yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to, quite derangedly, sorry, it's still quite early on a Saturday morning, I've not quite got my head together yet. Kind of what I wanted to, the thrust of what I wanted to say was that I think that we need to start joining those dots up. And you know, even Johnny Delaney 2003, it's a long time ago, but it's on the rise. Hate crimes, as we know in this country, have been on the rise across the board since the Brexit vote. But it's been getting worse and worse and worse. And we see the proposals from the Tory government to bring in to implement legislation that will criminalise trespass, which will see huge swathes of Gypsy people criminalised overnight. We'll see the police being able to come and take all of their belongings, take their children, put them into care, and imprison them simply for living. And yeah, so that's kind of a very tangible thing that's coming up. But more than that, we also need to think about the way in which, as I said, this kind of pervasive lack of humanity granted to Gypsy people. So in a 2017 report, 91% of GRT people said that they experienced discrimination. 77 had been victims of hate speech or a hate crime. Oh, that's huge. That's a huge number of people. In the same report, 40% of British parents said they would be unhappy if a close family member formed a relationship with a member of the GRT community. in a 2018 report from the ECHR, 44% of people said they would be happy to be openly racist against Gypsies. The second closest, it was the highest level. The second closest was 22% of people who would be happy to be as openly Islamophobic. In 2019, the UN Special Rapporteur on Racism criticized the UK government for the endemic racism within this country. In 2019, I think, in October 2019, there was an arson attack on Gypsy caravans in Glastonbury, which had been a site of tension in the local community. And this comes just 2 years after 2 young Romany women were burnt alive just outside of Rome in a similar kind of arson attack. This is on the rise, as it does, and it's scary, and we need to sort of be fighting it. But where does it kind of come from? And as I said, just to come back to it, it's that pervasive lack of humanity. So just to kind of end up, because I realize I'm just sort of talking on, it was mentioned earlier, Toby Perkins was forced to apologize this week, and it's great, and I'm glad that he's apologized, and I hope that it's the start of him educating himself and not throwing his weight behind racism just to get elected. But there are other members of the shadow cabinet who have also engaged in this. Jess Phillips, for example, in 2016, a constituent tweeted her about a group of travellers who had made camp in a bit of land within her constituency. She said that she was calling the police on them and that she would always be there to defend her constituents. Those people are her constituents. Gypsy people are people. They are the constituents of these members of parliament. They are represented by those members of parliament. They are not other. I think we need to be really, really clear that a rallying call for now is this legislation that they're going to bring in, is, as Jane was saying, access to education. It is levelling up. It is trying to bring down those horrendous levels of hate crimes that are experienced by GRT people across the country and across Europe. But we need to go further. We need to stand up in every single instance that we see and fight it and call people to account, particularly on our own side, because there's absolutely no place whatsoever for this kind of racism within the left. I'm going to kind of leave it there because I'm just kind of getting shouty now, and I'm not sure that's necessarily that helpful. But again, thank you so much for having me. I'm probably going to have to duck out in like 5 minutes because I've got to go and report on the Black Lives Matter demo. But again, thank you so much.
Don't apologise, Ben. I think it's really important that we're all outraged by what's happening. It would be really helpful if you let people know your Twitter handle. Maybe you can put that in the chat so people can follow you and watch what you're doing and give you support. I think that's important. Thanks very much. And we'll certainly follow up some of the things that you were talking about. I think one of the really important points you made was about how MPs should be representing all their constituents. Toby Perkins also used that excuse about how he, had to stand up for his constituents by saying the things that he said. Actually, what we on the left need to do is to challenge that. We need to challenge, and we need to educate, and we need to tell the truth. And I think that's what this conference, this meeting today is all about, those three things. I'm now going to pass the floor to Rosa Marie Cineros. I think, sorry, my Spanish accent's pretty rough. She will introduce herself. But we met when I was working in the European Parliament, and she's doing really, really amazing work. And I have to say that I think probably the best conference that I've ever been to in my whole life was this amazing Roma Women's Congress in Barcelona 2 years ago, which was just full of incredible, amazing women doing extraordinary things at grassroots level in their communities, but also linking up with each other, learning from each other, and absolutely committed to activism and to improving the situation for Roma. So Rosa Marie, the floor is yours.
Super, thank you everyone for inviting me, and I've already learned so much from my fellow community members, Ben and Jane, so thank you. And yes, I'm quite lucky that I was able to support the Roma Women's Congress that was organized by the Drom Kotar Mestipen, which is a Roma Women's Association, a tiny association in Barcelona, and with the support of the Catalan government. So just the association works at a grassroots level. Our goals are saying that education breaks those cycles of violence, and to also highlight that the Roma woman is organized, doing things within her family, within her community, and that work is changing all of these cycles of violence, and they're engaging with the political strands, the educational, the cultural, and it's quite a mix of voices, but that's celebrated, and we work at in a horizontal fashion. I'll just say that I am Spanish Roma. My father is Serbian. I've lived in various countries. I've lived in Spain, Germany. I now live here in the UK. I work here. And while I'm at the university, I still also organize and work with community members at a grassroots level. And that's really important to have those two voices coming together and to bring a network and to allow community members to inform the academic side, because I think that's another component that's missing. There's, often academia and that discourse sits up here and the community's over here, but actually the community has a lot to say. And while we've been hearing today just a little bit about some of the problems that exist for the community members are organizing and finding solutions to those problems. And we are able to have a voice. That might not always be very visible, but we're very resilient communities. Unfortunately, we've had to, find a way to make a space, to claim a space. I've been very fortunate that my mother made sure that I went to university and always had said that education was a key component of, freedom and of challenging and fighting and removing the barriers that exist for us as a community member. So I've kind of always embodied that. And now when I just happened to find, the Drom Kotar Association in Barcelona, it aligned with my work. And at that time, when I arrived to Barcelona, this was 11 years ago, they were organizing the first Roma Women's Congress. And I think what's unique about that Congress, and I think what Julie was trying to kind of touch on a bit, is that it's not a Congress where people like me who have been educated can come and share our experience. In fact, it's me, I have to bring someone. If I were to go to the Congress, I would have to bring community members that don't have an education, that are the most excluded, that maybe even never left their villages. And so we had 375 women with that profile attend the Congress, with the support of the Catalan government and the organization. We raised funds for years. We were able to fly people and cover all of their expenses. And I think I'll share my screen so you can see the images of the women, what exactly, oh, there's my little PowerPoint. Let's see, how do I do this? Presenter view, there we go. Do you see that correctly? Anyway, you can see I'll go to this image. We were at the Caixa Forum, which is again a very important place in Barcelona. It's a cultural theater. They gave us the space, and you can see the profile of the women varies from young babies, like my little baby here, to we had a woman who was 88 years old from Hungary who had never even left her village. And, women like myself and other, we like to call them community connectors, were bringing that profile to the event. And those women were speaking about the things they had done in their local schools, or challenging sterilization. And so it was a way to not only focus on the problems, but to highlight the solutions and the way that different women were organizing and honoring their traditional values, their traditional ways of working, but also there were also modern Roma women there. And it was just a platform of sharing, of kindness, of respect. And it highlighted how when we come together, there's a strength in numbers. When we come together and we have the support of someone like the Catalan government, of any government, who not only follows through and listens to the needs of the community, that it's incredible what can come from that that work. And it wasn't only about, you know, health and education, but there were also arts and culture, because that's a huge part of the community. So it was, and prior to, I should also say, prior to the Congress, we had a pre-Congress where key people from the community came together to decide on what the logo would look like, what the topics would be. And then they went back for a year and prepared with their local communities to discuss, okay, if everyone can't go to this Congress, what do we as those 3 or 4 or 5 women want to do to represent the community at this Congress? So again, it was very grassroots. Of course, there are always things like with travel and, you know, last minute of buying flights and, you know, but it was a team of 4 women organizing 17 different countries, 375 women. And again, it was just really concrete what came out. There was a declaration that came out, recommendations, conclusions that were not only given to the Catalan government, and that those have been implemented, but shared with the rest of member states. Yes, so I think I'll just show, if I can, this video so you can get a sense of the women that were there. I think it's really important to I will put the link in the chat as well. So we had politicians, we had, there's Julie. Julie was there. So, yes, and the other important thing to say is that it was Roma and non-Roma coming together, and that's a really important part of the Dromcotar's ethos. Education, working at a horizontal fashion, ensuring that the political strand understands what's coming from the Roma women, but also Roma and non-Roma coming together, and that it's not about because she's an academic, she has more knowledge, but about everyone is here as an equal. And if we come in just as people, we can respect each other, and everyone's opinion, voice matters. And that collective is the force, not the individual. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosemarie. If you follow myself and Rosemarie on Twitter, you put up that great film on Twitter this morning, and it really it made me feel really good, because that was such a wonderful event. It was really nice to see all the incredible women again. So please follow us and support the work that we're doing, because we're working together on this, and I hope that the example that we've demonstrated, Rosemarie, is an example for other people too. So I'm not sure if Ramona Constantin has been able to make connection from Romania. I can't see her online at the minute. So I think what we're probably going to do is open the floor. I did notice a number of points and questions coming up in the chat, particularly around the issue of education, which Jane has already talked about and I think is important. But also somebody had put up a comment about racism in the NHS. And actually access to health was one of the issues that the Roma Women's Congress addressed. And there's certainly been huge issues and problems about Roma across Europe accessing basic services and access to health, access to water. These are a human right. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a human rights violation when people are not able to access these basic services. In Kosovo, for example, the Roma community in one part of Kosovo, in fact, are suffering long-term health problems as a result of lead poisoning in their water supply, a case that I took up at European level using my parliamentary position, and we actually had to take issue with the UN, who were responsible for this camp and in fact who had not done anything about it. So even large institutions who should be able to cross those state boundaries and stand up for human rights were not able to do enough. Right, so I can see Elena, you've got your hand up. Right, sorry, this is the first time I've done this, folks, so I'm learning new skills. Elena, you've got
yeah,
your hand up, so
I think I managed to unmute myself now.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks. First of all, thanks to the panelists and Julie for your very extensive, if very depressing introduction to this topic. I wanted to share something from my home country. I'm Bulgarian. I've been living in the UK for about 7 years now, but I wanted to highlight some of the kind of very recent and very worrying developments in terms of anti-Gypsy racism in Europe, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, and how that combines with government's responses to the COVID pandemic, because I think we're seeing quite a toxic mix in some countries. And I wanted to share what actually happened at the beginning of the pandemic situation in Bulgaria, for example, when the first cases started appearing back home in March, they were from skiing tourists from Western Europe. So some cases in British tourists, some cases in German tourists. The response of the government, completely illogical, but incredibly racist, was to basically quarantine off Roma communities and Roma neighborhoods in a number of cities and towns where there were no cases registered at all. But the authorities moved in very quickly. They imposed lockdown. They imposed checkpoints on people coming in and out of those neighborhoods and those communities. At that point, there were no registered cases, not only in those neighborhoods and in those communities, but in those towns and cities at all. But immediately the response of the authorities was, it must be the Gypsies that are bringing disease into our country. That was, that's such an ingrained and deeply held prejudice that local authorities up and down the country, with authorization by the national government, managed to basically overnight lock thousands of people, restrict their already restricted freedoms and access to health and services. And in the same time, when the disease started spreading and there were cases in and out of those communities and those neighborhoods, there was a very well organized team of health mediators from those communities. So Roma representatives who would go into the neighborhoods, talk to people about what COVID is, how they can protect themselves. We're talking here about, overcrowding and multi-generational living being risk factors. Well, that is all compounded in Roma neighborhoods back home, combined with really poor public and sanitary services. And so the same authorities, the same local authorities that basically imposed these lockdowns, then refused to work with the health mediators. They refused to work with the representatives of the Roma communities, again, entirely motivated by their own prejudice and racism. And this is something that has, this is something that has been a problem in Bulgaria and neighboring countries for a number of years. But in the context of the pandemic, there was very little resistance against it, even from civil society, even from people who would normally be seen as allies of these communities. Because currently the fear of the pandemic is weaponized and used against Gypsy and Roma communities across Europe. And I'm sad to say that the European Union is not doing enough to, institutions are not doing enough to stem this and to sanction governments that are responding in this way. And I think as well, international, organizations and collectives seem to have so far largely ignored the massive issue that is, repressions against Gypsy and Roma communities, especially in light of the pandemic. And I think the situation has become quite insufferable for people on the ground. And that's basically, I mean, I guess my question is, how can we organize more effectively? How can we organize better so that we don't let down people the way we've been letting them down so far?
Okay, thanks, Elena. Maybe the panelists will answer that question at the end when I give them some time for closing remarks. I noted that Jan Kilsby had also raised her hand. So Jan, I'd like to give the floor to you now. If you can unmute yourself. Are you there, Jan?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Elena, can you put your hand down? So if you've already spoken, you need to put your hand down. Thank you. Yeah, I could hear you clearly, Jan, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm a beginner in terms of, I'm learning so much of around the world. What I find really sad, really sad, is that my grandfather had flower stalls, and every Sunday a group of gypsies would come up, chat with him. I was a child, but I was never told. I was never told my heritage. And I really feel quite pained about that. Barnes and Richmond and all those areas had huge, and still do. If you were to DNA, so many of the people that live there today that have never moved away, you would find they are huge from the Roma community. And I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud to know that I belong to the Smith tribe and other tribes, and we all came together, and without the travelling and without all the wonderful bravery, because it does take bravery to travel without cell phones or iPhones and no gadgets and no NHS, and you're living hand to mouth poverty, and you can be hung for stealing a rabbit because your family are starving. And I wish people would be more open about it. And I started sort of researching this when I discovered our name were in a book. It's called Gypsy Travellers Under the Westway, and it showed how the then black community, who had fought big battles to be accepted, once again racism, actually helped the Gypsy community under the Westway, because they were wanting, you know, the usual stuff, move them on, evict, and so on and so forth. And I'm proud today that my two grandsons, I'm proud to teach them of their heritage. And if it wasn't for the amazing journey that my ancestors had not made, I wouldn't be the grandmother to my two amazing grandsons today. I wouldn't be the mum to my three beautiful children. And I'm deeply grateful to my beautiful granddad. His name was Leslie Kilsby, and he was one of the most beautiful, amazing human beings on this planet. He had the heart of an angel. He died when I was 12. I miss him every single day. I'm 60. He was the father I wish I could have had, because I had a lot of difficult childhood, and he and my nan took us on. And I will always forever grateful to him and his love. And he's a shining example to me of what love and care. And when he died, he had over 300 people at his funeral. He just reached out to people. He had flower stalls, and I worked on those flower stalls in all weathers, and I still miss it. I miss that out, and I've got so much of him in me. I hate being contained in the house. I love sitting. I love the elements. I love trees, and I hate being I don't know if other people feel like this. I hate being trapped. I really do. And what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is I would love to learn more. I'm researching my family tree. I would love to connect more, but I'm a bit nervous because I don't want to intrude into other people's worlds. How do you, hi, I'm me, I live in a council house. How do I connect with people and say, I'm on side, what can I do? What little can I do in honour of my granddad, in honour of all the forebears that went before? And I also put up a bit earlier, my great-grandmother, Kezia, she had her 9-year-old child taken from her. It was the workhouse or Canada. Her 9-year-old child was taken from her because she was a widow who had no money. I did research and I found Kezia's, I found her children, she went to Canada, she was nine in the 1800s, 9-year-old child taken to Canada. She had a terrible experience, but she did marry and she went on to have 6 children, and she's got 1 surviving child left, and I just look back at these stories and I get so angry. And I think if we do not speak out now on all aspects, LGBT, on race, we are in danger of the right wing. They are making inroads, and we have got to be as tough and as strong and as outspoken against it all. And education for me is a massive way forward. But anyway, forgive me for talking too much, and thank you for allowing me to talk. I'm a nervous wreck inside. And solidarity.
Oh, Jan, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I was an MEP founder of a network of MEPs called the Eli Wiesel Network, and we pledged to stand up against genocide and genocide denial. Part of that job was to go to the sites of genocide and to tell the stories and to give a platform and a space for testimony. And that's really important. What you said today was so important. And I think also links back to Ben's parting words before he went off to do his campaign, which was, we have to join up the dots. And I'm very proud of Another Europe is Possible and the work that we do. We're not afraid to tackle difficult issues. We're not afraid to put on events like this, and there's not enough people within there's not enough people within the public sphere, within the political sphere, who really are willing to take this on. So I think it's really important what you said today. I don't think that Ramona has managed to make connection with us. I will try and put up a, sorry, because I'm chairing, it's a bit difficult to watch the chat, but she is a member of Europea, which is a project, a network project based in Manchester that's standing up for the rights of EU 27 citizens. It has a very big cultural aspect to the work. There's actually a program called Europea Arts Collective, which I'm a patron of. And Ramona is one of the membership organisations. Her MIGROM organisation is a member of that network. So she herself is Romany and really understands the issues at a grassroots level and is very good at networking between the different organisations in Manchester who are standing up against all forms of racism. And that is how I met her. I met her through campaigns that we were running against racist politicians and people like Tommy Robinson who are coming to Manchester. And what you just said, Jan, about us standing against all forms of xenophobia, against homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, anti-Gypsyism, we do have to join those dots. I attended the Pride in Budapest 2 years ago, and there was a particular float and group of campaigners who were LGBT from the Roma community. But we had to march with police protection because of a counter rally from the fascist far right. And that is what all people who are other and people who identify, who have multiple identities of otherness are facing right now. I think probably it's, is there anybody else who wishes to speak? I haven't seen any more hands up. If there's anybody else who'd like to make comments or speak. Otherwise, I will give the floor back to the main speakers. Okay. I can't see anybody else with a hand up or anybody else with anything to say, but we've still got Rosa Marie and Jane with us, and there were lots of questions that came up there in terms of the chat, but also from the things that Elena talked about. So if I give the floor back to you, Jane, would you like to comment on some of the things that you've heard and some of the questions that have been asked?
Sorry, I'm just, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you really well,
Yeah,
thanks.
brilliant. I just think some of the things that have been said, and especially about that last comment, Julie, about joining the dots with other forms of racism and homophobia and that kind of thing, it's a very similar thing. I think racist groups are racist. They're looking for a target, and I think sometimes they look more closely, so whatever's close to them they will go for first, and then it kind of filters out. So I think actually standing together makes us a bigger voice. Absolutely. I think education is absolutely the start where we go, not just education for kids, not just starting it off like that. We've got a massive platform if we can get this into schools, because you know, that's where opinions and the norms are formed. We need to do that straight away, but we also, parallel to that, need to show local authorities, the police, the wider authorities, the government, that actually there is have a responsibility, and that's, they need to either learn what they have to do, or they have to absolutely follow the rules and support us 1%. And I think what Rose Maria was saying about the academic side meeting and bringing along those women and empowering people that aren't necessarily academic, they have strong stories to tell, and I've been to conferences and things like that have had that similar platform for other people, and I think that's what we need to do more. We need to show people that actually you don't have to have an academic kind of status to be able to have a voice. We need to give everybody a voice. We need to show them how to give that voice, and in turn that will make us stronger as a group. And I just think we need to provide that challenge wherever it is, whoever it's for, whether it be gypsies, whether it be black, you know, homophobia, things like that. We need to be that voice of challenge. We can't go back on this. We need to keep moving forward, keep pressing forward.
Okay, thanks for that. Obviously, you're working in education now, having trained as a primary school teacher, but you're also working in political education within the Labour Party, and so I think that that issue about lifelong learning is really, really important. Just like to pick up on the point where you talked about local authorities, governments, police, etc., needing to know what their responsibilities are. I was a school governor, and I remember attending school governor training on equality and diversity, which at the times would have been 10, 15 years ago, was actually at the time really good. But I was about the only school governor who bothered to do that. And I think that the kind of training that I submitted myself to and learned a lot about all those years ago has stood me in stead. It always made me realise that I had to be really aware. I had to keep checking in. I had to think about those really wide issues about equality and diversity. I would say particularly, Jane, because where we're calling in from today in Durham, you know, this is not a very diverse community on the face of it. In fact, the largest ethnic minority population here is Gypsy Romany Travellers, and so it's very easy for the community to think that there isn't a problem. But you know, there's even more work to do often in these places. And I've been standing for a few positions recently within different Labour groupings, and one of the things that I've been advocating is that anybody who has a position should undertake to do equality and diversity training. We need to do that. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I did put up on Twitter, on Facebook a couple of days ago, something about a note that was pinned up in an NHS hospital, asking whether or not it was okay for people to speak in different languages in hospital settings. And I couldn't believe the amount of conversation that then ensued about that, where some people were saying, oh, are you saying that the NHS is racist or xenophobic? And people kind of really defending the institution. And yet I know that people have been on the receiving end within the institution. And that's not to say that the institution itself promotes racism, but is it doing anything, is it doing as much as it could to demonstrate equality and to stand up against racism of all forms? And I just think that we all have to commit to do that lifelong learning and education ourselves about how to make our institutions properly fulfill their obligations. Anyway, Rosa Marie, if I hand back to you now.
Julie, before you go, could I just say, sorry, just pick up on the point about the equalities education for your governor role. I understand where you're coming from, because I am a school governor as well. I don't think we as governors, or if you're sitting in any position you're opting to go into, we shouldn't be like you said, you opted to do that. the same. I opted to do it because I wanted to know what they were actually rolling out as a local authority. You should be required. It should be a requirement of anybody wanting to take up a position to represent anybody. They should be required to understand everything, whether it be a voluntary role or a paid role. It's not good enough for a police officer to say to me, and I'm going on, I can't say too much, but I'm going on personal experience that they don't understand. Then they need to go and understand, because they are unfit for purpose in that role, and that's why we need to challenge from the top as well as getting in from the bottom with the education. We need to challenge these people who say they don't understand, because although they might not be racist by nature, by supporting a system that isn't challenging, that isn't supporting, they become racist.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Jane. Rosa Maria, I've seen that Vibeke is wanting to say something. Is that correct? Yeah, I'm going to give the floor to you. I'm not sure I've said your name right, but if you could take the floor now, that would be great. Okay. Are you there?
Is that to me or to Vibeke?
No, Vibeke. I saw that she said something in the chat. We just give her, yeah. I'm just saying yes. Can you hear me? Is she there?
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You unmuted yourself. Great that you're with us today.
Hi, I'm Wiebke. You pronounced my name perfectly, all right.
Good.
And I'm from Settled. That's an organization helping, a volunteer-led organization helping EU citizens to get a status under the new EU settlement scheme. And I just read a little thing already in the chat. Maybe everybody could see this. It's about, not many people know that all EU citizens, non-British EU citizens living in the UK now have to apply for a status, a residency status under the new EU settlement scheme. And I think that there are a lot of these EU citizens and their family and non-British families members in the UK among the Roma communities who do not really know that they have to do this. And I want to raise awareness about this, so that this has to be done. There's a deadline to this. This application has to be done by the end of June 2021. And we as a charity from Settled, we are trying to reach out to all Roma communities as well to help them with their application and spread the information about this. I could pop, so please, wherever you are in the UK, if you are in the UK, please spread on the word about this. This is really, really important. I could pop my details into the chat, just sort of, you can contact me about this, just sort of, we can come and help with information sessions, and we can also come with lots of volunteers who are accredited to do so to help people one-to-one with applications. So that's all about it. If you have any question, please ask.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm really glad you spoke, because there are lots of complications, aren't there? There's the existing racism that people face, and then there are crises that occur, which then make life even more difficult for people. And Elena certainly talked about that with the COVID-19 crisis, and of course Brexit. Brexit is the reason why I met Ramona Constantine, because of the increased levels of racism and anti-Gypsyism that were occurring in Manchester. In fact, I just will tell you a brief story, which is overnight on the night of the referendum in 2016, a group of Roma children who were playing out in a park in Levenshulme were subject to such threats that their parents asked them to come into the safety of the home, and those children subsequently were not able to play outside again. They were so frightened of the harassment and the abuse that they received, and it's because of that that I began to work with Ramona in Manchester, to meet with the community, to take their concerns to the different authorities. We managed to get a specific youth club opened up for them, because actually if you're a child and you cannot play, that also is one of your human rights taken away from you, and those children were too frightened to be out on the streets at that point in time. So and I know that Ramona's continued to do really, really excellent work. So I've put up her organisation's link in the chat box. Rosa Marie, if I give the floor to you now, maybe to answer some of the other questions and comment on some of the other things that came up.
Sure. First, Wiebke, I know that, thank you for sharing that information. I know that there was lots of, in the translations of the documents, it didn't say that you must apply, it say that you might need to, or something along those lines. So there was something there that the Home Office, and there were several different languages where that was a problem. So, you know, that's something that I've also been sharing with people as well, that it's not an option, it's mandatory, or you can apply. Yeah, that's right. And so thank you for sharing that. And I myself have had many problems with the Home Office because I actually have an American passport. That's another story, but I was here on a tier 2 because my husband's Turkish, but we can talk about that another day. But I did want to comment and thank Jan for sharing her story and testimony. And one of the things that I think there were lots of important points in there to reflect on. And one was the fact that, you know, there was a lot of perhaps fear in the community around identity and self-identifying. And I'm not surprised that some of that was hid, because these are choices that a lot of community members have to say when to self-identify, or decide when to self-identify, when not to. And if to pass on that legacy, if to share the language, I mean, these are all at so many points in someone's life, you know, we have to think about that. And it's not easy. I know, just speaking Spanish to my children, I was at the botanical garden and I was told by someone, why am I here? You're in this country, speak English. Yeah, is that fine? Yeah, okay. And, you know, so, and I think that there's something else around, you know, the curriculum doesn't reflect the community, the books, the material, the schools don't reflect the diversity of the community and of the voices and that history. So it's not a history that's known. It's not a history that we can, in a way, claim. And it's something that, you know, that's something else that as a political level, we need to think about and make sure that, you know, we're also fighting for, because if we can see ourselves in the books and if we know our history, then we're better prepared and armed to defend ourselves. And so I know that that's something that some colleagues of mine and friends are also actively doing. And, you know, something else that Jan said around racism and institutionalized racism, and indeed we do need to fight against that, and there are ways that we can do that. I also feel that a key part of the Roma community is, although we've endured several horrific things, there's an element of kindness that maintains, that guides, that there's a center of hope that something else can be better. There's something, and I think when people migrate and leave everything behind, or are forced to because lack of human rights in their home countries, you know, there's a hope, there's still a hope and a belief that there's something else that's better, and that people in this other country might treat us a little bit better, might see me as a human being. And so I think that that's another thing to highlight, that the community can have a move from a place of love and kindness, and yeah, and I just wanted to highlight that.
You're on mute, Julie.
Right, sorry, I was trying to multitask a bit there. Okay, thanks very much. I think perhaps the question that we didn't really answer was Elena's question about wider responsibilities, how we can address some of the horrendous anti-Gypsyism that's happening in particular countries across Europe, particularly EU countries, and how and whether or not the EU can take a stronger stance on this. There are a couple of MEPs from the Roma and Sinti community actually in the European Parliament at the minute, and I suggest that you follow them. One of them is Romeo France, who's a Green Sinti MEP from Germany. He's in the Education and Culture Committee, which is the committee that I was a vice chair of. He's a very, very strong voice for the community. And both he and I were vice chairs, sorry, we were both co-presidents of the intergroup for anti-racism and diversity. And I know that he was speaking actually very loudly about issues to do with anti-Gypsyism in the current crisis in the committee this week. So I know that he is a strong voice and that he will continue to be a strong voice. In fact, there are Roma MEPs in several different political groupings within the European Parliament, which I think is interesting. One of the vice presidents during my 2014 to 2019 mandate, one of the vice presidents of the European Parliament was actually Roma, and she was Hungarian. Curiously, she was part of Orban's party, which I always found quite strange, but it does demonstrate that people can achieve these positions if they're, you know, if they get the support back home, and that once they're in the European Parliament, they can then build communities communities of support to enact certain legislation, certain policies. Within the regional development programme, I was on the regional development committee as well, and we stood up for the Roma community to get access to European social funds, specifically during my mandate. And in fact, in order to do that, we needed to name anti-Gypsyism in the report. And I can remember there was quite a lot of opposition about that, but I stood my ground. I was really proud that I stood my ground and that we won all our amendments on that. So I would ask you to follow Romeo. When I'm talking to you, I can't put the link up, but he's one of the strongest voices. Sorry, I just wanted to say something about the Fundamental Rights Agency, because the Fundamental Rights Agency is an EU, it's an independent agency, but it was set up by the EU to look at fundamental rights. And it does reports on the plight of the Roma, and every couple of years. And I was looking at their most recent report from 2019, which is titled "The Plight of Roma Sees Little Change." And it has a very interesting infographic in which you can see that there's been an increase. So I think their previous report was 2 years earlier. So there was actually an increase in segregated education for Roma children between their two reports. So things are getting worse, not better. Within the 5 to 50% in more segregated education. 1 in 5 Roma faces discrimination using public transport or shopping going out. 1 in 3 of the Roma surveyed continued to live in housing with inside. So this is the situation at European level. Some changes which have happened, some signs of national Roma integration strategies explicitly addressing anti-Gypsyism. So some countries are actually taking on board the EU integration strategy by doing their own national strategies, but not enough of them. And what we should do is look at where there's best practice, and we should be sharing that best practice with our comrades and colleagues here in the UK. There are some initiatives that are promoting Roma inclusion and empowering young Roma and Roma women. And certainly we had lots and lots of conferences and events with Roma youth, with Roma women, with Roma communities in European Parliament. And I regularly spoke at meetings of the Roma Education Network. A few national courts have ruled against Roma discrimination in work, education and housing. And the EU's high-level group against racism and xenophobia has prioritised the fight against discrimination and anti-Gypsyism. So there is stuff happening because the FRA is given the mandate to look at how the fundamental rights apply to all citizens in EU countries, and that's their report which went back to the institutions. So anybody who's in contact with people struggling within member states can use this report to put pressure on in their own countries. I think I put up in the chat about an organisation called Roma Versitas. I was really proud to work closely with an organisation called Solidar. It's the socialists, kind of civil society, lifelong learning trade union global network. Every year they have an award called the Silver Rose Award. They have it in 4 categories. And, oh, I've got no sound. What's happened there? Oh, no sound. Okay. I think I'm losing sound, maybe because I'm losing power. Can you hear me? You can hear me. Okay. Sorry about that. I was just talking about Solidar and the Silver Rose Award, and I was talking about an organisation, a Hungarian organisation called Roma Versitas that won the Solidar Silver Rose Award. So civil society organisations, campaign groups, we can really help to shine a light and give a platform to some of the amazing initiatives that are happening. And I suppose what I will take away from this important meeting today is for us not to stay in our silos, but to stand up for all human rights. It's not good enough just to take up the cause of one minority group, and we have to stand together as all minorities, as all people facing discrimination, and I count myself amongst that as a woman. And we have to all stand together and make sure that the struggle is a struggle that all of us are working towards. I think that's probably everything. I really want to thank everybody who's spoken today, everybody who attended, and everybody who's put up important links and comments in the chat. It's been a very moving experience. We've had a lot of personal testimony, yeah, we need to go out there, we need to change the curriculum, we need to change politics, we need to change attitudes. Let's do that together. Thanks very much.